Alrighty, hello folks, welcome back to Tinkaton, where we are going to think a ton about these decks that we've made. Today, instead of battling, we're just going to, like I said, go through the decks that I've made and kind of explain how they work in concept. We're going to start with a Dusk Till Dawn deck, which has been my favorite to play with lately. Mostly because it's got one of my favorite Pokemon, the Dragapult EX, and when we just look at this card, my God, is it beautiful. The colors, the shapes, the textures on it. I wish I had this card in real life, folks. It is just a card to behold. It's also got some great cards like the Mimikyu, which has the Safeguard ability, preventing all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's Pokemon EX and V. That's pretty handy for people who like to powerhouse their decks. Unfortunately, it doesn't really protect my cards that have rule boxes, such as my Radiant Greninja, so that can easily be bosses ordered into the active spot and nuked by whatever their EX or V cards are. Of course, my Kangaskhan EX, which is just in there for draw power, as well as my Dragapult EX, are not protected by, let's see here. Well, I'm getting kind of cards mixed up. I'm also thinking of this Neutralization Zone. Neutralization Zone and Mimikyu EX I play together pretty often because it keeps my bench safe from being switched out most of the time when Mimikyu gets switched off of the active spot and back onto the bench. But with Neutralization Zone, it basically acts as a Mimikyu ability, the Safeguard ability for any of my bench Pokemon that don't have rule boxes. But again, it doesn't protect my Greninja, nor my Kangaskhan EX, nor my Dragapult EX. It does, however, keep my Duskull line pretty safe, as well as my Dreepies and Dracloaks. The Dracloaks I love having on the bench because of their ability Recon Directive, allowing me to, once a turn, look at the top two cards of my deck and put one of them in my hand, the other at the bottom of my deck. So I'm not discarding anything, I'm just putting it at the bottom. Which is pretty fantastic, especially when it's just an ability. I can keep that on my bench. It's just great for draw power. I like to have 3 in the deck. That way I can have probably 3. And when I'm going against an opponent, which you've probably seen before, where they have an EX or a V card that just overpowers what my Dragapult can do, and it's just a menacing opponent, I can throw out that Neutralization Zone and send out my Dracloak, which for 2 energy, a fire and a psychic, allows me to do 70 damage without being harmed myself. Of course, they can always throw in their own stadium to neutralize my Neutralization Zone. But again, with Mimikyu, I feel I've got a pretty solid buffer wall against big cards. And then of course, let's see here. So we've kind of touched on that, but we haven't really talked about the Duskull line and why it's in here. The basic is good if I have a few Duskull in the discard pile. For 1 cost, Psychic Energy, put up to 3 Duskull from my discard pile onto my bench. I only run 3, so it's not the most effective. But once we get the Dusclops, the Cursed Blast ability allows me to, once a turn, I can put 5 damage counters on one of my opponent's Pokemon, benched or otherwise. It knocks out my Pokemon, giving them a prize card, but that's not the end of the world when being able to do 5 damage, which can knock out a lot of basic Pokemon, preventing them from getting their stronger lines out, their evolutions. If they do get their evolution down, I can always evolve my Dusclops into Dusknoir and use the Curse Blast ability on here, which does 13 damage counters to one of my opponent's Pokemon instead of 5. So instead of 50 damage, 130, and that's a lot more formidable. And then of course, if I want to use it for its own attack, Shadow Bind allows me to do 150 damage for a 3 cost. And then during my opponent's turn, or my opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't retreat. So it keeps them kind of stuck. And what I like to do with these guys is I'll keep my Dusclops line on the bench, try to get it all the way to Dusknoir with either Rare Candy or evolving through Dusclops. But once it gets up to Dusknoir, I can one-shot a lot of the basic and sometimes even stage 1 Pokemon. If that doesn't get them, my turn is still going. And then I can always throw out Dragapult EX and do Phantom Drive for, again, just 2 costs, doing 200 damage to my opponent's active Pokemon, and then spreading out 6 damage counters across my opponent's bench Pokemon, however I like. So if my opponent has a Pokemon that has 200 health or less, and then they have fairly decently sized Pokemon on the bench, I can use my Dusknoir to add 13 damage counters, and then use Dragapult EX to add an additional 6, which can knock out 2 to 3 Pokemon in one turn, which is sometimes even 4 if done right. Wow, just fantastic. Just fantastic. I love it. It's my favorite deck. It's very easy to wipe out the board, especially if they only have a few cards on their bench and their basics. It doesn't take long to get Dragapult EX out, especially with Dracloak's ability to just keep drawing. And then, of course, with Radiant Greninja, draw power, Kangaskhan EX, draw power. I like using my Pokemon abilities to get cards in my hand. That way I'm not wasting card space for draw power. I can keep Mimikyu in the active spot while I build up my bench. It's pretty nice. Buddy Poffin, gotta have him. It's just a simple way to get weak basic Pokemon on the bench, but 2 at a time. That's pretty good. And then for the bigger ones, you use Nest Ball. That's how I get my Radiant Greninja and my Mimikyu, or Radiant Greninja, Mimikyu, or Kangaskhan EX. I don't know. No, the Buddy Poffin can also get the Mimikyu or the Mimikyu out, I believe. So the Buddy Poffin gets 1, 2, 3 of my lines on the bench pretty quickly. Energy retrieval. Just nice to get energy that you've already used back into your hand. This deck doesn't run a lot of energy use, but it is necessary. And so because I don't run very many, or I don't have a high demand for energy, I don't run very many energy, period. Let's see, how many do I have? 7 of each. Yeah, so 14 energy is not that much. It's typically what I like to see in a deck. If I have to run more than 14 energy, I feel like the deck isn't really effective. It's too slow. But you can always use cards like Energy Retrieval or Super Rod. There's even the Super Energy Retrieval, where you have to discard 2 cards from your hand, but you get to draw 4 energy from your discard pile. I don't like the cost of that, so I don't run it very often. But it is an option. Rare Candy, I don't like to run more than 2, especially since I already have the middle stages for each evolutionary line. Night Stretcher, very helpful. Put a Pokemon or basic energy from your discard pile into your hand, so it's versatile, and it doesn't even say it has to be basic, stage 1, stage 2. It can be any Pokemon, V, EX, don't matter. Iono, yeah, that's how I say it. Well, I'll probably be corrected, but this is great for control. If your opponent is getting ahead of you in both prize cards and hand, like draw capacity and hand, this card is fantastic for saying no thank you and making them shuffle their deck, or shuffle their hand back into their deck and drawing for how many prize cards they have left. Caveat is you've got to do the same. So if you've got a big hand and it's got lots of good cards, it's not really worth it to play. But if you've got 1 or 2 cards in your hand and you've got a few more prize cards, it can actually be a lifesaver. Changes the tide of games often. I only like to run 1 though, because after that it's a bit excessive. Lady, I like to have a couple of them in just about any deck that requires energy. I say requires energy because I actually have a deck. Where to go? Iocane Powder. We'll get into that one in a little bit. But my Iocane Powder doesn't have any mana in it. I'll explain why later, but it's a fun way to cheese the game. Let's see here. always got to have switch because boss's order, or if you need to get a Pokemon off the active spot, like my Mimikyu, when I'm ready to attack, throw a switch, get the Mimikyu off the bench, or off the active spot, and throw whatever Pokemon I plan on attacking with into the active spot. Neutralization Zone, one of my favorite cards that they've added. Love it. Beautiful to look at, and just OP. Great for control. Lance is good for this dragon deck. It's got Dragapult, Dreepy, and Dracloak. So all of this dragon types. Very beneficial for when my deck is running a little behind. And if I get a Lance, I can draw the whole line or multiple of basics or whatever I need. It doesn't say basic stage 1, stage 2. It just says dragon Pokemon. So I can grab what I need. I run 2 of them just in case one runs up into the prize pool. Paldean Student. I used to run 4 of these just because it gets more effective each time that you play it. Each time you throw one in the discard pile and you play the next one, it gives you the option to add one more. So you can search one more Pokemon each time you play it. Very nice. Downside is can't have a rule box. And I don't know. I feel like with my Buddy Poffins, with my Nest Balls, with my draw power with Greninja, Dracloak, and Kangaskhan, I end up not needing to use Paldean Student very often. This card, I'm not even going to pretend to know how to say it with my dyslexia. It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare for my opponents a lot of times too. In an earlier video, my opponent was just thriving. I was able to throw out this card, and they had to discard 7. No, they had 7 in their hand, so they had to discard 4 down to 3. Which they weren't too pleased about. And then I threw out the Neutralization Zone, which got rid of their Terra Stadium. And they had 8 Pokemon on their bench, and they had to go back down to 5. So great for control. Great for saying no to whatever ramp up they're doing. The Luxurious Cape. I throw it in every now and then, especially if I feel like my Dracloak is going to be in the active spot pretty often. Needs a little bit extra help staying alive if my Neutralization Zone gets taken out or something. They get to take one more prize card with this. It does give me my Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box 100 HP extra, but if it gets knocked out, they get to take another prize card. So I keep it in. I don't use it all the time. Sometimes I do. I'm playing around with the Power Glass because well, it's a new card. I haven't really used it. I've used it a time or two, but with this deck, again, since my Pokemon don't have a high energy cost and I get most cards that I need pretty quickly, it's mostly just beneficial if I throw it on one of my bench Pokemon, like a Dracloak or Dreepy that doesn't have any energy on it, and it gets switched to the active spot and they don't knock it out for some reason. So it allows me to add energy to my active spot Pokemon from the discard pile. So at the end of your turn, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot, you may attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to it. So that's pretty neat. It's not the greatest, but it's there. In real life, I have a beautiful gold version of this card. Love it. But again, it stays in a binder. Another one I like to use is Evolution. 1 cost, any color. Choose up to 2 benched Pokemon for each of those Pokemon. Search my deck for a card that evolves from that Pokemon. Put it onto that Pokemon to evolve it. Shuffle the deck. So that can be great even if I don't draw the cards that I need, but I do draw that card and I've got my Pokemon on the bench. I've used this Evolution card and it has saved me a time or two. It's rare that it does, but it comes in handy. Same with the Technical Machine Turbo Energize, another 1 cost. Allows me to search my deck for 2 basic energy cards and attach them to my bench Pokemon in any way I like, and I shuffle my deck. That's helpful if I'm just not getting energy, which is sometimes a common occurrence since this deck doesn't have much energy. And then of course my energy here, 7 Psychic, 7 Fire. And that, folks, is my Dracloak Dusk Till Dawn deck in a nutshell. Next up we have the Discard 3.0. I call it the 3.0 because, well, this is my third version. I started off with the Whiscash and Barbaroach play, I want to say a year or two ago, and I just couldn't make it work. I made 2.0, which was a lot better, but then cards that I was using, they got cycled out. So I just kind of let it sit on the bench for a while until, what was it? Until they started coming out with cards that are really helpful for discarding, actually. So we'll go through this deck. It's a fun cheese deck, very fun to get people to rage quit, especially if they're using like a Gold Dingo or any deck that really just powers through their deck, like draw power or discard power. This just speeds up the process and oftentimes leads to a fun win for you and a frustrating loss for your opponent. Nothing says I love playing Pokemon like saying you don't get to play Pokemon. So I start with Barbaroach, the water type. Even though it's an older card, it's from the F series. I like using this one because of Irida, which I run. How many do I run in this deck? I run just 2. If I already have the Squirtle and Blastoise out in the Radiant Greninja, but I don't have my line for Whiscash, then Irida is pretty helpful. I might actually end up adding another Irida just because this deck has a lot of water in it. But there's not a lot of search cards for fighting type, as far as I know, at least not in my collection. So I like running the water because there's more search power and supporters for searching for water. But I start with the Barbaroach, 60 HP, Rain Splash is its only attack, weak to electric, retreat cost 1. It's not a great card, especially since I run 0 water energy in this deck. But it evolves into Whiscash, which is a fighting type, which is also the type of energy that I run. And, you know, it has a 4-cost attack Land Crush that does 140 damage. That's great. But what we really want this card for is Raging and Rocking. For each fighting energy attached to this Pokemon, discard the top card from your opponent's deck. That's a 1 cost, so you know, you might just throw 1 card starting out. But with this Blastoise here, if you get Blastoise out on the line, which is fairly easy to do, you can use the Vitality Spring ability and drop 6 energy, 6 fighting, 6 special, it don't matter. You can drop 6 energy onto any Pokemon of your choice on your bench or active spot. The only caveat is that it, you know, ends your turn. However, it is well worth it to end your turn to drop 6 energy on a Pokemon or spread it out however you need. I like to drop sometimes all 6 onto Whiscash, and then on the next turn throw it into the active spot and start discarding heavily from their deck. While I'm doing that, I've also got Manaphy with Wave Veil on the bench, keeping my bench Pokemon safe from a lot of attacks. Although I have noticed that they've been changing the phrase from damage to damage counters. Damage is different than damage counters, so Dracloak can still get past my Manaphy. The Duskull line, Dusknoir, Dusclops, they can also get past Manaphy because they're doing damage counters, not damage from attacks. So that makes Manaphy a little obsolete these days. I think that was their response to getting around Manaphy being in so many high league decks. Obviously, we've got Greninja for draw power. Squirtle, I run, how many do I got in this deck? I've got 2 Squirtle and 1 Blastoise. I only need 1 Blastoise. Can only use one of its abilities anyways. And then Squirtle, I run 2 just in case one ends up in the prize pool. Mimikyu, again, same reason, just keeps opponent's active Pokemon from knocking me out before I want them to, especially if it's an EX or V. Kangaskhan, I love getting Kangaskhan early in a match because it allows me to draw 3 cards, which gets me where I need to be. 2 Buddy Buddy Poffin, 2 Energy Retrieval. Hand Trimmer is a new card that they came out with that I started to play with. I kind of enjoy it. Each player discards discards cards from their hand until they have 5 cards in their hand. Your opponent discards first. If a player has 5 or fewer cards in their hand, they don't discard. So that's great if I'm running low on cards and my opponent is just thriving with cards in their hand. I can make them discard down, make it a little bit more even, a little bit more fair, and of course it fits wonderfully within the discard concept. So I keep at least 1 in there just because it's not often that I have more than 5 cards in my hand, but it's also not often that I have an opponent that has more than 5. Because once you get into the higher levels, if you have more than 5 cards in your hand at the end of the turn, you probably need to make some adjustments to your deck because you're not playing all your cards that you can per turn. You should be ending a turn with roughly 2 or 3 cards with means of gaining more. I also have Heavy Ball in here just in case Squirtle or Mimikyu, any basic Pokemon really, end up in the prize pool. I can save it from being there and get it on my bench and do what I need to do. Just 1 Nest Ball in this one. I'm not sure why, but it's how I built it. I need at least 1 Nest Ball. Night Stretcher for getting Pokemon out of the discard or energy out of the discard. Rare Candy, I run 2 just for the Blastoise line. You may notice I don't have a single Wartortle. It's a risky gambit, but with Irida, I can search my Blastoise and a Rare Candy. If I already have a Squirtle on the bench, boom, I don't need a Wartortle. And it skips a step, makes it so Blastoise can get out quicker. I also run this beautiful Super Rod, shuffle any combination of 3 Pokemon or basic energy cards from my discard pile back into my deck. That's helpful for this deck because a lot of cards will end up in the discard pile because they get stacked on one Pokemon. That Pokemon gets knocked out. It all goes into the discard pile. And then this Super Rod can shuffle some of them back in. My Blastoise can get them out from the deck back onto the field. It's synergy. It's good. The switch, I run 2 of them. I like to run 2 switches because 1 is never enough. 2 sometimes is. Ultra Ball, I run 1. I don't like to sacrifice 2 cards to gain 1. It's helpful in a pinch, but most of my cards I don't like sacrificing. Neutralization Zone, this is a largely non-rule box deck. I only have 2 cards that have a rule box, so the rest of them are very well protected by the Neutralization Zone. I can throw the Neutralization Zone up, prevent damage from EX and Vs, while I have my Whiscash just pulling cards from their deck and throwing it in the trash. Very, very good synergy. I like to also have the Pokestop because it allows my opponent to draw cards, but discard cards that aren't items. So draw 3, discard any cards that aren't items. Whenever I click on that, I never pull items. It's very rare I pull items, even if I have an item-heavy deck. So it's just helpful. It gives them incentive to discard their own deck, essentially. Sometimes it's helpful for them, sometimes not. But I can also throw a Pokestop out just in case they run a deck that looks like it's going to have their own stadiums. I don't want to start off by throwing Neutralization Zone out because they'll just easily throw their own stadium and discard it out, and then I don't have my shield that I love. If I throw Pokestop out and they don't like Pokestop, they can throw their own stadium, discard Pokestop. I can then, if I have it, throw out my Neutralization Zone, neutralize their stadium, and make mine what I need. Most people don't run a lot of stadiums, but with the Terra cards and everything, there are stadiums being played pretty regularly. Fire decks like using the Magma Basin stadium card. I don't see Neutralization Zone used very often. In fact, I've only seen it used maybe once. And I immediately loved it so much that I stole it and put it into my deck. But with the Terra decks, they also like using the Terra Stadium, which allows them to have 8 Pokemon on their bench if they have 8, or if they have a Terra in their active or bench spot. And so this neutralization zone and the Pokestop, they kind of feed for each other. And then we have Arazu, which allows me to search up to 3 evolution Pokemon that don't have a rule box and put them into my hand. This is helpful because the evolution Pokemon that I have, all of them, don't have rule boxes. And the only evolution Pokemon I do have is Whiscash and Blastoise, and they are both very necessary for this deck. 1 Boss's Orders just allows me to switch out my opponent's bench Pokemon to the active spot. This is helpful when my opponent has a strong, non-rule boxed Pokemon, and I would like to have them have their Pokemon with the rule box in the active spot, EX or V. Put that in the active spot with my neutralization zone. Or if I don't have the neutralization zone in effect, I can still Boss's Orders, get their Pokemon that can't attack onto the active spot, set. Eerie, or Airy, is one that I have been experimenting with. Your opponent reveals their hand and you discard up to 2 item cards you find there. This is helpful. Oftentimes, though, people will play their item cards, and so it's a little hit and miss, I've noticed. If they don't play their item cards, then great, I get to discard it for them. Otherwise, I just get to look at their hand. I put 2 in because this is a discard deck. I'll do anything that allows me to discard cards from their deck or hand. Iono in this deck as well, just for that opportunity to throw the tides. 2 Irida, search your deck for a water Pokemon and an item card, reveal them, put them in your hand, then shuffle your deck. Fantastic for getting either Barbaroach or Squirtle or even Blastoise or Greninja or Manaphy. There's so many water Pokemon in this deck that it might as well be a water deck, but I only have fighting energy, so that way I can discard cards. We also have the Misfortune Sisters. The Misfortune Sisters allow me to look at the top 5 cards of my opponent's deck and discard any number of item cards I find there, so it could be up to 5 items. Your opponent shuffles their other cards back into their deck. So it throws off their groove. If they used a card that puts cards that they search on top of their deck, it can shuffle them back in, making that a wasted turn. If they have a bunch of items in their deck, it's a great way to thin their deck. It's a discard card, discards from my opponent, so it's in my discard 3.0 deck. We also have Professor's Research, which allows me to discard my hand and draw 7 more cards. Very good, I've noticed. If you have like 1 or 2 cards in your hand and you just want a new hand, you want 7 new cards, it's very helpful. In this deck, I also run 3 of this guy, primarily because if they have a lot of draw power and they keep getting more than 3 cards in their hand, I can keep saying no. And because this is a discard deck, any cards that allow me to discard are going to be in this deck. Curse Duster. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, discard a random card from your opponent's hand. So I can throw that out on my active Pokemon that doesn't stand a chance, and then it gets knocked out, and then I get to discard any card from their hand. I've already been able to, in-person matches, I've played this card and it has gotten rid of some very, very good cards from my opponent's hand, and it turns the tide. Luxurious Cape, we've already talked about this in the Dragapult deck. It just gives my basic Pokemon, or my Pokemon that don't have a rule box, 100 extra HP, but if it gets knocked out, the opponent gets to take an extra prize card. That's really good on my Whiscash. I throw out my Whiscash. What's its starting HP? Like 140? Yeah, 140 for the Whiscash. You throw the cloak on it, and it gets 240 health, and making it a much more challenging card to knock out. And in this deck, that's well worth the risk. Reversal Energy. This one is a little challenging to play consistently, but if you like losing, or actually in this deck where I don't really go for prize cards, I don't go for prize cards at all in this deck. If I can discard your deck, that's all I want to do. That's all I want to do, is make you draw your last card and lose the game that way. So it's often that I will have more prize cards than my opponent, which allows this to go from one colorless energy to a card that provides every type of energy, including fighting, but provides 3 energy at a time instead of 1 colorless. So if I'm losing, which is often in this deck, or so it seems, it goes from a colorless energy, just 1, to 3 fighting energy in this deck, which is very helpful. Blastoise can pull all 3 of those, or I mean, I just run 2 in this deck, but it can run with the Blastoise, what's the ability called? Vitality Spring. With Vitality Spring, I can get both of those reversal energies. I can drop one here on Blastoise itself, or I can put it all on my Whiscash, spread it across my Whiscash, which, you know, triples the value of each card for fighting energy. So instead of 1 energy, it's a value of 3. Very fantastic. So I run 14 energy in this deck as well, 12 fighting, and 2 reversal energy, which has the potential to be 6 energy altogether. So it has the potential to go from a 14 energy deck value to an not 14, but 12 to 18. So that's pretty great. Say 18. I'm not good at math, folks. Let's not focus on what it does. It increases my energy. So that's my discard deck, discard 3.0. Another one that I'd like to talk about, Woo Woo Energy. We'll go into that one really quickly. So it runs on the Bramblin and Brambleghast. This Pokemon gets 50 extra HP for each prize card your opponent has taken. So if you're losing, this guy gets pretty beefed up. And then, its 3 cost attack does 80 times the heads that you get from flipping a coin for each energy attached to it. So I like to stack energy on this guy. Flip the coin, leave it up to fate, and it can be, even with just 3, you have the potential to do some serious damage. If not, was that like 27, something like that? So 270 damage if you just have 3 and you get all 3 heads. You can also have the unlimited potential for 0 damage. So it's a little hit and miss. But with Teal Mask Ogrepone EX, the ability Teal Dance, once during your turn you may attach a basic leaf energy from your hand to this Pokemon. If you attach energy to a Pokemon in this way, draw a card. And it has a similar attack to the Brambleghast. However, it does 30 damage base and then 30 more damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. So if you have 3, your opponent has 3. So that's just 90 right here, and then 180 plus 30, so 210, give or take. And that's, you can easily stack more on this, making the value more. I got my Manaphy in here to prevent damage to my bench. Greninja for draw power. I got the Squirtle, Wartortle, Blastoise in here for getting energy from my deck onto my Pokemon. I'll apply them to either my Brambleghast or my Ogrepone EX. I used to have, I still do, my Palkia. If I don't get my, Brambleghast card out early enough and I get Palkia on the field, it's kind of similar value. It's a grass and a water energy. This attack does 40 damage for each basic energy attached to this Pokemon. Gets rid of the risk factor of flipping coins and does 40, so half the risk, half the value of damage. So it's pretty comparable and it looks cool, and it's got decent energy, HP. I've been tempted to take the Palkia out. That's why I only run 1. When I first built this deck, I didn't have any of these credits so I only was running what I already had. I might actually make some edits to this deck because I haven't touched it in a minute. As you can see, it's kind of fallen back. It's what got me up into the Master Leagues, or at least close to it. The Dusk Till Dawn got me into the Master Leagues once I was in the Ultra Leagues, but the Woo Woo Energy deck got me into the Ultra Leagues. I run the Mimikyu for the same reason as always, the Kangaskhan EX for draw power. I run one Buddy Buddy Poffin because I don't have very many basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less. My Bug Catching Net is a newer card that they've released. Twilight Masquerade, it looks like. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You may reveal up to 2 in any combination of grass Pokemon and basic grass energy cards that you find there and put them into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck. It's like a Great Ball that specializes in grass Pokemon or energy. So instead of getting one Pokemon out of the top 7, I can get a Pokemon, an energy, two Pokemon. It's a lot better than a Great Ball. I love it. Especially for this deck that runs grass energy. I think. It runs grass, right? With my Brambleghast. Yeah. Ooh, that's a lot of energy. Let's see here. So energy retrieval. I don't run a lot of energy retrieval in this deck because apparently I just run so much energy I don't feel the need for it. Heavy Ball for getting things out of my prize pool and back into play. Nest Ball to get the cards that probably my Kangaskhan. That's probably what I really... And Ogerpone. Kangaskhan and Ogerpone for the Nest Ball. Night Stretcher, get them back out of the discard pile and into my hand. Pokegear 3.0. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You may reveal a supporter card you find there and put it into your hand. Shuffle the other cards back into your deck. That's good for... what do I have need for? Actually, that's really good for getting Irida. I only run one Irida in this deck. Pokemon Headquarters. I think I run a few different stadium cards in this deck, so that way, one, they have some benefit, but really it's just when I was playing this deck a lot, people were playing a lot of stadiums, and they kept bumping out my neutralization zone, making it harder and harder to win. So in response to that, a while ago, I created this deck that had quite a few stadiums in it to throw out their stadiums, hinders them a little bit, until I can get my neutralization zone out and active and do what I really want to do. I've got Berry in here, just draw 3 cards. Boss's Orders to switch out their Pokemon to be more convenient for me. Cypher Maniac's Code Breaking. This has been actually a pretty nice card, especially in my Dracloak deck, which I don't... Is it in that deck? I can't remember. Search your deck for 2 cards, shuffle your deck, then put those 2 cards on top in any order. So if I need cards, I can search them, 2 of them, put them on the top of my deck, and then I can use Greninja or even Ogerpone to get those cards from the top of my deck into my hand. So it can be very helpful. I'm not sure why. Do I run that in Dusk Till Dawn? I do not. Wow. I might have to make a change for that, but I don't know what. I'll think about that later. But Woo Woo Energy, almost done with this one. It's a little woo-woo, but it works. I pretty much just chose Switchguard because I've got a lot of basic Pokemon and it heals them. Beach Court, the retreat cost of each basic Pokemon in play is 1 less. Lake Acuity? Oh, that one. All Pokemon that have any water or fighting energy attached to them take 20 less damage from attacks from opponent's Pokemon. Neutralization Zone. Pokemon League Headquarters. Attacks used by each basic Pokemon in play costs 1 more energy. Berry. Cypher Maniac. Gardenia's Vigor. This has been a favorite of mine since my first deck, which was a grass-type deck. Allows you to draw 2 cards, and if you drew any cards this way, you can attach up to 2 grass energy cards from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon. Now, mind you, This allows you to draw 2 cards, and if both of them are grass energy and you didn't have any grass energy, that's a lifesaver, and you can still play them from your hand to your bench Pokemon, to one of them. Very helpful for turning tides. Iono, Irida, this guy, again, let's see here. And then I run 10 grass energy and 10 water. It seems a bit excessive. I might make some changes soon, but I kind of lost interest in playing this deck once I started having fun with the Discard 3.0 and Dusk Till Dawn. My Ancient Wonders deck was, I don't know. It's not even worth mentioning. It was an experiment that went terribly, terribly wrong. I wanted to see what would happen if I put all of my ancient Pokemon and ancient cards into one deck and discarded them all. I think so that way I could use the Roaring Moon, which does 10 more damage for each ancient Pokemon or ancient card in my discard pile. So 70 plus 10 per ancient card. Sounds pretty great. Sounds that way. And then the Primordial Beatdown for Koraidon. This attack does 30 damage for each of your ancient Pokemon in play. You can have 6 Pokemon in play, so that's 180 damage for 2 cost. It's just not a great deck. Yeah. In fact, I don't even want to talk about it because I don't like it. I don't think I've won very many games with this deck. My Gardevoir deck is another experimental deck. I went against some people that had a pretty solid Gardevoir EX. They won. And usually if I get beat by a deck, it makes me consider making that deck or beefing up against that play style. Let's see. I don't even remember this deck, so I'm not going to try and explain it. My Iocane Powder, however, I love this deck. This is such a fun one because it's a cheese deck. I run 0 energy in this deck. 0. I haven't played it in a hot minute since the last set, actually. Got kind of obsolete. But let's see here. We got Timber, which don't do anything with because I've got no energy. I've got Girder, with, again, I have no way to use. But with Conkledurr here, Conkledurr allows me to do, for 0 cost, if this Pokemon is affected by a special condition, ignore all energy in this card's attack. In the attack cost. So 250 damage. It's a 4 cost attack. I run 0. I run 0 energy in this deck. But I only run this deck for this attack, Gutsy Swing. It's fantastic, and I'll tell you why. Because of this guy, Brute Bonnet. Brute Bonnet has the ability Toxic Powder. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon has an Ancient Booster Energy Capsule attached, you may make both active Pokemon poisoned. That, when teamed up with Conkledurr, gives me a 0 cost 250 swing every time. 250 is pretty heavy. That's a good hit, especially for no energy requirement. So what I like to do is obviously get my Brute Bonnet out with the, where is it? Yeah, the Ancient Booster Energy Capsule. Just flows off the tongue. This ancient Pokemon, or the ancient Pokemon this card is attached to, gets 60 extra HP, recovers from all special conditions, and can't be affected by any special conditions. So make sure you don't put this on Conkledurr or any of its evolution line. It is a waste. You put it on Brute Bonnet, which gives it the ability to poison both active Pokemon, poisoning your opponent's Pokemon, and then also poisoning Conkledurr, giving him a special condition, poison, giving him the ability to swing for 250, 0 cost. It's fantastic. You can make your own version of this deck. I run the Neutralization Zone once again because there's no EX or Rule Box Pokemon in this deck, so it just keeps them alive. Lots of Night Stretchers, lots of switches, lots of rare candies. Quite a few of the stadiums to, again, kind of psych out people and make them think I'm all out of stadiums, and then I throw down Neutralization Zone when they've run out of their stadiums. Let's see here. cards that I haven't really gone over yet. I have Arven in here for the Pokemon tool and an item. And that's helpful because I can get rare candy and the ancient booster capsule, whatever it's called. So that way I can attach it to Brute Bonnet. Very good. And then Bill's Transfer. Look at the top 8 cards of your deck. You may reveal any number of Pokemon you find there and put them into your hand. So that can be helpful if, let's say, they get condensed in the top 8 cards of my deck. It's not the best, but it's something. And then Boss's Orders, Clavel for 3 basic Pokemon with 120 HP or less. Put them into my hand. I can play them then if I want to. Colress's Tenacity. Search your deck for a Stadium card and an Energy card. Reveal them and put them into your hand. That's really just in here for the Stadium. I forgot about the Energy part of it, actually. But it's so that way I can get that neutralization zone because it's so crucial to keeping my Pokemon alive in this. Explorer's Guidance. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck and put 2 of them into your hand. Discard the other cards. It's helpful for getting things I need out of the top 6. Unfortunately, it discards them. So it comes with a kind of high cost, but in a pinch, it's very, very useful. And you get to pick the 2 out of 6. So then we also have Iona for control. Lacey here. Shuffle your hand into your deck, then draw 4 cards. If your opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards remaining, draw 8 cards instead. Very helpful if you're losing. And we already talked about him. We got this Ancient Booster Energy Capsule, which is the backbone of this deck. It's the only thing that makes it work. Binding Mochi. I like putting Binding Mochi on my Conkledurr because attacks used by the poison Pokemon this deck is attached do 40 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon. So not only does it do 250 for 0 cost, but if it's poison and has Binding Mochi on it, it does 290. That's enough to knock out just about any Pokemon except for the crazy ones that are just threatening. But those crazy ones are neutralized by the neutralization zone. So it's a fun one. I really enjoy my Iocane Powder deck. Brutal Swing is just about drawing as many cards as I possibly can. So that way I can use my Big Hammer, which is a 2-cost attack, any color. But this attack does 30 damage for each card in your hand. I have had 20 cards in my hand before. 20. That's 600 damage in one attack for a 2-cost. It's brutal. It's brutal. No hindrance to it. You just have to have a lot of cards in your hand. So I run Natu in order to have Xatu with the Clairvoyant Sense. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic Psychic Energy card from your hand to one of your bench Pokemon. If you do this, you can draw 2 cards. My Tinkatink allows me to draw a card for 1. This one allows me to put an item from my discard pile into my hand. Look at the top card of your deck. You may put that card into your hand. If you don't, discard that card and draw another card. And then flip a coin. If heads, discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. My Tinkatinks, I just pretty much, I don't know, I wanted to diversify, I guess. Tinkaton, not to be confused with the channel name Tinkaton, no relation. The ability Gather Materials. You must discard a card from your hand in order to use this ability. Once during your turn, you may draw 3 cards. So you keep this Tinkaton on the bench and use the Gather Materials to just start drawing. That way, you get a nice fat hand, which allows you to use Big Hammer and do severe damage with 300 HP. It's pretty nice. Uxie, to make sure I get the cards that I need. If I start with Uxie, I can search for a card and put it into my hand, then shuffle my deck. Kangaskhan EX, we all know about this card. Draw 3. Standler, whatever. But Wire allows me to use the Hurried Gate, and once during my turn I can draw a card. Buddy Poffin, Energy Retrieval, Nest Balls, Night Stretchers, Pokegear, Rare Candy Switch. This Artisan allows me to search a basic Pokemon that doesn't have a rule box and put it onto my bench. Allows the opponent to do the same. Arven for items and tools. Bill's Transfer for searching. with luck. Boss's Orders, Clavel, Jacques. Jacques allows me to search for 2 evolution Pokemon, period, and put them into my hand. Very helpful for getting the Tinkaton line. Lady for energy and just having more cards in my hand. Miriam, shuffle up to 5 Pokemon from your discard pile into your deck. If you shuffled any cards into your deck this way, draw 3. Very nice, very nice. Tulip, for a Psychic deck, you gotta have it. Put 4 in any combination of Psychic Pokemon and basic energy cards that are Psychic from your discard pile into your hand. We have already talked about him. Deluxe Bomb, Pokemon Tool. If the Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, even if this Pokemon is knocked out, put 12 damage counters on the attacking Pokemon. If you placed any damage counters on your Pokemon this way, discard this card. So it's a one-shot, 12 damage counters. Makes it to where if I get hit, so do you. Psychic Energy, and there we go. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Stay classy.